Welcome back. Former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo has handed over the Section 89 panel report on President Cyril Ramaphosa to the Speaker of the National Assembly. For more reaction now, let's welcome in Political Analyst Ongama Mtimka. A very good day to you, and thanks for making the time. You were watching the process. Our legal analyst who was talking to said this was a very legalese process with very defined parameters. Just in terms of analysis that no matter which way it goes, the reputation of the president has already been damaged. Do you agree with that?
So maybe first let me talk about the legal nature of the process. I think that's the success of institution building that has come from, backlashes when Parliament acted in a way that was too power-centric initially. And I think that South Africa is in a better place now, where you find that the conduct of power, whether it is the level of legislature or the executive, has over time shown increasing sensitivity to this concept of legality and legal compliance. And that bodes well for us because it means that the preeminence of the rule of law at least is guaranteed. I've looked at this throughout the process, that the Speaker has always been interacting with the process in a way that says, what does the law say? As opposed to how best can I delay, dilly-dally, and not do what is required. And that was comforting. Indeed, the reputation of the president is negatively tarnished by the Phala Phala scandal, but that shouldn't be a complaint from a politician, because this outcome is only going to help us understand the first attempt by a professional group in terms of determining the seriousness of this matter. But the scandalous nature of it is not going to go away up until the time that the president has spoken and gotten cross-examined on some of the choices made about choosing to keep stash money as opposed to bank it, whether there was violations of exchange control laws and all of those things.
There certainly is something to be said, though, about the process that is being followed. And it was a question that was asked in Parliament there by one of our colleagues, Mercedes Percent, about this 5.3 million rand that was spent on the work of this independent panel. Was it really worth it if, at the end of the day, the National Assembly really still has to take a decision about whether or not they comply to the recommendations of the independent panel, when you do also have criminal charges that have been laid concurrently against the president by Arthur Fraser? So
when I argued the point even before the inquiry was appointed, was that it's one thing for politicians to hear allegations and discuss about them and make decisions based on, for example, purely political imperatives with some rationality. It's another when a body that is perceived to have some degree of competence applies itself to the claims and counterclaims and recommends a position or makes a finding. Then when the National Assembly behaves in a way that is disregarding what may have been recommended from there, then you have a tool, an instrument or outcome of a process which was an exercise in rationality, with which to juxtapose the behavior of Parliament, even if Parliament does the decision on the basis of a simple voting. If there are if there's a rational action that is recommended by the committee, and Parliament takes a power-centric approach of saying, the numbers of the ANC are outweighing the numbers of the opposition that may have a different feeling, then you've got basis to challenge that outcome, even in a court of law, even if this is not an outcome of an inquiry or a quasi-judicial institution. By virtue of having had professionals apply themselves to the claims and counterclaims and make a recommendation as to what they think, you at least have elevated rationality and perhaps put it at the same level as the voting that's going to take place at the National Assembly, such that if it is voting alone that is irrational that wins the day, the opposition and civil society have got something that they can work with, other than in an instance where Parliament would have dealt with this in a power-centric approach without even having an institution and a structure that would go through the claims and counterclaims and arrive at a recommended way forward.
So a different conversation.
So it was worth spending the money. Right. That's the point I'm making, Naledi.
Understood, yeah.
Mr. Mtimka, another conversation will be taking place this afternoon when the report is released, only to be tabled on the 6th of December. But let's just go back to the panel where it was saying that the rules state that the panel must consist of 3 fit and proper, competent, experienced and respected South African citizens with necessary legal and other competencies and experience to perform a preliminary assessment of motion. What are your thoughts about the panel as we come out of this process and their capabilities?
So I think that the capabilities of the panel were not in question in terms of the skills and the background of the professionals around the table. So we can only hope that the report itself attests to what otherwise is a merit-based selection of members. So that's one. The second issue for me that should be borne into account is that the what happens to the preliminariness of the report, and that's important. And I'm a very strong believer in this process, in a value called epistemic humility, being humble about the true significance of your work, because that's important so that the work doesn't get elevated to what it is not. But at the same time, based on the experience and competences of who was around and the evidence that's been availed, it is not like it was done by a group of politicians. So you've got a fair balance between acknowledging and giving enough importance to the report based on who worked to produce it, people of good social standing and no known political allegiances. And then secondly, the fact that it's a preliminary report suggests that you may need other processes in order for it to carry a much greater weight than the one it already does.
Yeah, I think just one last question for me, and I suppose what I'm going to ask you to do is throw the bones here, Mr. Mtimka. It's a difficult thing to do. But you are President Cyril Ramaphosa. You know that the report is being handed over today. It is also going to be shared with members of Parliament, and by tomorrow, many of us will know what is in it. What is what's the thing that's on the top of your mind at this point?
2 things. President Cyril Ramaphosa represents a political grouping that shares ideas about how to build the state in the aftermath of state capture, or while a new version of state capture is emerging. So that's one. The second issue is survival. My view is that, mindful of, should the report come negative, the president shouldn't be so married to the idea of him leading that he fails to strategically position the work of rebuilding the country in other people who may be equally competent or best placed to take forward some of the victories that he has had. So I don't agree with the principle that he must have a feeling that willy-nilly he must remain president. Otherwise, he would be taking us back to 2009 when a compromised president, when measures were made by all means to make a compromised president to get into power. And guess what happened? The institutions that could do something about his compromised nature were themselves compromised, and the rest is history. The other one is that the president may, and this is a more realistic, so the first approach was an idealistic one that I've presented to you. A realpolitik approach, by the way, could be one where, regardless of the finding, the president looks at the balance of power in the National Assembly and looks at the strong position he is holding at the level of the ANC and is nonchalant about whatever the outcome of the report, and then presents a legalistic argument about the need for other law enforcement agencies or courts of law to actually apply themselves to this matter. Both of those are possible, and in fact, I would say the latter is more possible, given that this is South Africa, than the idealistic position I was advancing earlier.
So you're seeing that more likely we might see a litigious process. So I think it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, though. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Ongama Mtimka, there, political analyst.